Welcome again. In today's lesson, we look at topic 2.5.2, which requires us to describe photosynthesis and respiration in terms of inputs, outputs, and energy transformation. So let's move in and take a look. And here we see a student exhaling into a test tube of bromothymol blue. And the blue color goes to green. The reason for that is because exhaled air contains carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is an output of respiration, and glucose and oxygen are inputs. So when we breathe out, about 4% of the air that we put out of our lungs contains carbon dioxide. And this whole process of respiration uses glucose and oxygen as inputs, and here we verify that carbon dioxide is an output. It's interesting to note also that the process is quite inefficient, and a lot of heat is lost when respiration happens, but overall it does release enough energy to provide for the needs of living organisms. So let's verify this now in a different way. This time using germinating mung beans, and we have our beans set up in a biochamber, which allows us to monitor the rate of consumption of oxygen and the rate of production of carbon dioxide. Oxygen, of course, is an input of respiration, and carbon dioxide is an output of the process. So at the end of our hour, we see that carbon dioxide concentration rises and oxygen shows a corresponding decrease. And if we analyze this very closely, we would see a very close correlation between the outputs and inputs of respiration, which are oxygen and carbon dioxide. A quick question, which test tube has more carbon dioxide? If you chose the green test tube, then you're correct, because BTB goes from blue to green in the presence of carbon dioxide. Given this information, a student set up another experiment with an aquatic plant exposed to sunlight and submerged in BTB. And she waited, and she waited, and she waited some more, but BTB remained blue all day long. Eventually, day turned into night. The next day, she arrived at school feeling very blue. But to her surprise, the blue test tube had turned green, at least the one that had the plant in it. And another test tube on her rack that had BTB but no plant stayed blue. She thought about it for a while and realized that it must have something to do with the absence of light and the presence of a plant. So she set up another experiment and blocked out the light this time. And within a few hours, there you have it. The test tube in the dark turned green once again. The test tube in the light stayed blue. The explanation for this lies with the process of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis consumes carbon dioxide and produces glucose and oxygen. This consumption, however, is dependent upon the presence of light. Photosynthesis happens in light, and the green pigment chlorophyll present in leaves and in algae harnesses specifically red light and blue light for this process, which uses carbon dioxide. So what happened all day long was whatever carbon dioxide came out of respiration was very quickly consumed in photosynthesis. To verify all of this, let's consider one final experiment. This time we put a plant in a biochamber, and if the plant uses carbon dioxide in the presence of light, then we should see changes in oxygen and carbon dioxide levels, the inputs and outputs of photosynthesis. So we set up a plant, and this plant supposedly uses blue light and red light and reflects green light. Let's verify that first with another investigation, and then we'll come back and check our chamber. And here we see a sample from algae put into a spectrophotometer, and what you see in front of you is the absorption spectrum of chlorophyll, showing you a peak at the red and the blue areas and a lot of absorption in those areas, and green reflected and not absorbed very much. And back to our results. And what do we see? In the presence of light, carbon dioxide decreases and input of photosynthesis, and oxygen and output increases. And in the absence of light, if we set the same experiment up in the absence of light, what we see is a decrease in oxygen and an increase in carbon dioxide, because the plant is unable to photosynthesize, but it carries out its respiration. And here are some final questions for you to consider before we get to the next area of discussion and have a look at our closed system and all of the questions associated with it, and we will take up our discussion from this point in class.